Here. Oh, yes.
Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Ann McNiff and I'm the Executive Director of the Chestnut Hill Community Association. Thank you so much for attending tonight. We're very pleased to kick off the fall season with a apple pie making demonstration by the Night Kitchen. I'd like to introduce Amy Edelman, the owner of the Night Kitchen, and Turquoise Apple, the general manager. Before we get started, just a couple, I really need to get my dog out of this. Get that dog. She was fine until Zoom started and now she has to run around. Couple Zoom hints, if you're not familiar, I would suggest that you go to the view button, which is in the top right-hand corner of your screen. It looks like a rectangle with 3 little dots on top. It says view. If you click on that and click on speaker, that will make whoever is speaking the main face on your screen. And as soon as I get done with the introduction, I will no longer be speaking and it will only be Amy and Turquoise, and you'll be able to see them as large as possible. So go ahead and do that. Also, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. If you're not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of the screen, if you hover down there, several things are going to pop up and one of them says chat. If you click on there, you can just type your message. It'll say everyone, but Therese will monitor it. And speaking of Therese, I'd like to also introduce Therese Tiger, who is our membership coordinator. Many of you have had interactions with her. And also here tonight is Heather Gray, who is our marketing and communications director. And she is in charge of the filming of the demo. So if anything moves around, that's because Heather's trying to get you a better shot. So without any further ado, thank you again for attending this members only event. We're happy to bring them to you. If you have any ideas of things you'd like to do or see, please let us know. And let's get started in seeing how the experts make apple pie.
Hi, everyone. We're very excited to be here tonight. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the community first, because during COVID, the community of Chestnut Hill, Mount Airy, and the surrounding communities were so supportive towards us and so generous that I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to everyone, because the Night Kitchen has survived and is thriving, and it's all because of you. So we really wanted to say thank you first. So tonight, Turquoise and I are going to be making 2 apple pies, our double crust apple pie and our apple crumb pies. And we're going to walk you through all the steps, but we're not sharing any recipes, because when we make a recipe of, say, crumble topping for apple pies, it's enough crumble topping for about 50 apple pies. So we thought that, you probably don't want to invite everyone in your neighborhood over to eat 50 apple pies. So we would just make 1 of each tonight. And I'm going to guide you to my favorite website, which is allrecipes.com. When I'm home cooking for my family or have a couple of friends over, I use recipes from All Recipes, because they always have several hundred, if not thousands, of reviews and a rating of 4.8, 4.9, 5. Their recipes always work. So that's where I would go for pie crust, for pie dough, which I'm going to show you how to crimp tonight. Crumble topping for the apple crumb pie. And that's really the only 2 recipes. So, and we're going to show you everything. So the first thing I'm going to show you, this is the pie tin that we use. It's 9 inches in diameter, and it's called a deep dish pie tin, even though it doesn't look particularly deep. I think it's only like 1 inch or 2 deep, but you can certainly use your Pyrex dish or a ceramic dish that you have at home. This is only 1.5 inches deep, but it's 9 inches. I think it's 9. No, is it 9? Yes, 9 inches in diameter. So we make pie dough, and we make 50 portions at a time. And this is a little tip for Thanksgiving and for the holidays, which is to make your pie dough, roll it up into a ball, put it into an airtight container and freeze it. And that way you can get ahead on, you could make all of your pies. If you're making pies for Thanksgiving and Christmas, you could make all of your pie dough now. Just put them all in the freezer, and then you have them ready to go. You defrost them just like anything else you defrost, you put it in the refrigerator the night before so that it defrosts slowly and safely. So the thing that we do differently at the Night Kitchen is, because we don't use any margarine or trans fats or Crisco, shortening, anything like that. We use all butter. We just, our recipe is just flour, salt, water, and butter. So if you find a recipe, it's going to be hard to find a recipe that's all butter, because people really like the flakiness that a Crisco or a shortening or a margarine gives to the dough. You can just either use that, or you could substitute all butter. It's just going to make a crispier crust. Yummy. So this is a pie dough portion that we rolled out to about 11 inches. And I am going to first make sure that it's evenly placed into the pie pan. And it's important to press in, because you don't want to have any air pockets in your corners here. So we're just going to press all the way around so that it's nice and flat in the pan. Then I have a pair of scissors handy, just in case there's any extra bits, because we want the little piece that's hanging off the sides to be as even as possible. And I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little, probably about 1/4 inch hanging off the very edge here. So we're going to go around and just trim so that we have about 1/4 inch all the way around. Now, some people like a really large crimp. Some people like a little dainty crimp. It really doesn't matter. It's all about how you want the pie to look in the end. And one thing about the crimp on, as you can see on this apple crumb pie, the crimp doesn't really matter in the end, because we put so much of the crumble topping on, it tends to kind of sometimes fall down the sides and look very rustic. And so you can't really see the crimp anymore. So you could, for an apple crumb pie, just fold that little extra piece of dough down and under and not crimp it at all. But I'm going to show you how to crimp it, because it looks really beautiful for the cherry crumb, which has a flatter top. It's not as domed as an apple pie or a pecan pie. I think you really need to have a nice crimp for those pies, and also for the pumpkin pie, of course. So we're just tucking that under all the way around. Now I'm going to take 2 fingers on one hand and 1 finger on the other, and I'm going to press into that top edge. And I'm just going to go all the way around, turning the pie tin as I go. And you want to kind of press it over the top edge just slightly, so that it doesn't sink if you par bake your shell. Some people like to par bake their shells for a pumpkin pie, for example, because it doesn't bake as long as some of the other pies. Apple pie, it's not necessary, and we do not par bake the shell. And you can make it really fancy if you want to spend a lot of extra time and do a second crimp. which would be to, once you have like this, you can take your little rounded edges and just give them a little tweak. And it looks like a little sunflower. Oh, it's so cute. Look at that. Isn't that pretty? Then, if you really want to take some more time, you can do a second inside crimp on that other little rounded section. Now, I don't really know of any places that make a really nice frozen shell. Maybe Whole Foods, I don't know. But if this is the biggest process, in my opinion, of the whole pie making process, because you really have to have the dough. The dough has to be perfect, and the way you make the dough and not over mixing the dough is really, really important. So again, I'm taking this little rounded part and I'm just tweaking it so it looks like a little sunflower. Now, what we would do, is to put this in the freezer. Now, the only reason I would recommend that you not put it in the freezer ahead of time, like too far in advance, is that once it gets hard and brittle, it can break pretty easily. So we would just pop it in the freezer just so that it holds its shape for about 10 minutes or an hour while we prepare our filling. Okay, so we have this beautiful little shell. Let's pretend that's in the freezer. And now we are going to make the filling. So I'm going to actually let Turquoise explain the apple situation.
Alrighty. So here in my kitchen, we use Granny Smith apples. These apples are great because they are grown all year round and they're a little bit more acidic than other apples, which means that they're less water. So when you're baking it, you don't get a watery mess. And so we always make sure that we peel them before we use them.
And by the way, the type of peeler that Turquoise has is by far the best peeler ever.
Yes.
All chefs use this peeler. It just works really well and makes the whole process go much faster. We'd like to see the crimps a little close up.
Okay.
The crimp.
Alrighty. So once you have your apple peeled, you want to cut, making sure that you don't cut the core because we don't want any core in our pie. And then once you have all your apples sliced, you want to cut them, and we like to give fairly chunky slices. It just makes for a better pie and it cooks better that way. So if they're too small, then they'll cook too fast, and if they're too large, then they won't cook fast enough. Fairly chunky pieces for your apple pie.
I think they're about 1/4 of an inch thick.
I'd say they're probably about 1/2 inch.
Yeah,
Yep.
You're right. Wow. So I think it's really important to taste your apples before you do the second step, because these apples, for example, I just tasted them, and during the summer they were we use these for our Jewish apple cake. So we use them all year round. And during the summer, I noticed that they were very sweet. Now that we're in the fall, they're sour again. So, I would add a good tablespoon of sugar. And we're just using regular granulated sugar. Turquoise and I each have about 5 or 6 Granny Smith apples.
We use about 6 Granny Smith apples in every pie.
So we're putting about a good heaping spoon of sugar over the apples. Then a little bit of cinnamon. I would say about a half a teaspoon.
Thank you.
And then about another heaping spoon of flour. And the flour is just going to keep it from turning into a watery mess. It's going to kind of bind the apples. And the reason that apples don't freeze well is that they have very little water in them compared to other fruits like peaches and all the berries. And so they freeze really well, but apples do not freeze well. So you really have to peel them and slice them you can, again, slice them a couple of days in advance to get ahead. But really no more than like 3 days, I would say. And you can go a little heavier with the cinnamon if you would like, but it's just basically a coating of the cinnamon, the sugar, and the flour, and you want to mix that really well. As you can see, like if you were mixing other types of fruit that had more water in them, at this point, after stirring it 6 or 7 times, you'd have a big pool of liquid in the bottom, but there's nothing, it's still completely dry with the apples. So, set our apples aside, or are you going to do the crumble part? You're going to do the crumble. All right. Yeah.
Why do you peel the apples? Do you ever not peel the apples? Is there a reason?
I think the apple peels are too thick. I don't care for them. You could leave the apple peels on. I don't think it's a texture.
It's a texture. It's a different texture. The skin makes it a little bit tougher. So when you're eating them, it's a tougher bite than if you're just eating an apple. So we usually peel the skin.
Yeah. So turquoise is going to make the crumble.
Alrighty, so we have our pie shell, which we have just taken out of the freezer. So it's nice and set and firm for us. And so we do use 6 apples in every pie. So you're gonna have a nice heaping mound of apples.
And as they cook, because they're going to cook for about 45 minutes to an hour in a 350-degree oven, the apples are going to get soft and cook down, and you don't have to worry about anything overflowing in the oven.
Right.
But it's always good to put it on a little
Pan,
sheet pan
right.
just in case.
Sometimes the crumb falls off while it's baking.
And those are the little bits that fall on the pan that everybody loves to eat.
So once we have our nice heaping mound of apples in our pie crust, we take the crumb, and you want to completely cover it with crumb. And when you are putting the crumb on, some of it is going to fall. I like to take my hand as a little shield to try to get it on there as best as possible. And because there is so much butter in the crumb, you can kind of mold it as you go onto the pie. You just want to try to make sure that every bit of the apple is covered. And as you can see, our crumb does have lots of chunky bits of butter in it. You just want to make sure that all of your apples are completely covered so that when it bakes down, the crumb will kind of bake and the apples will get soft and they'll bake down too, so you won't have this giant dome anymore. But it will be more domed than, say, your cherry crumb pie.
Alrighty, so let's talk about, that's beautiful. That is really gorgeous. Yes.
Someone had a question if you could say a few words about how to make the crumb.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's talk about crumble. Okay, perfect. So all baking, we use all unsalted butter for everything because you want to be able to control the amount of salt that goes into anything. And recipes for baked goods often do have a little salt in them. So, for example, for the crumble topping, we're using unsalted butter, and you want let's say you have your recipe, and your recipe is very basic. It's 3 ingredients. It's sugar, butter, and flour. So you're going to have your unsalted butter, and you want to keep that cold. And I know, it's the opposite of what you do with everything else, where you're making cookies and they tell you to leave your butter out at room temperature so you can cream it with the sugar. This is the opposite. You want your butter to be nice and cold. And basically, crumble is really easy to make in a bowl by hand. You can just cut your pieces of butter into chunks, little squares, I don't know, quarter-size squares.
About a quarter.
You throw your sugar in and your flour, and then you just work all of it together in the bowl until you have pieces that are this size and pieces that are this size and some pieces that are completely small. And the reason that you do that is so that when it bakes, you're going to have some really nice thick pieces that are going to be crunchy, and you're going to have others that are going to be soft. So it's a really nice texture combination and contrast to the nice soft apples. And when we cook our pies, we cook them for about 45 minutes to an hour. The way that you know when they're finished and they're done is when the juice of the apples is bubbling up around the outside of the pie. And we like to serve and suggest serving pie with ice cream, warm with ice cream. So if you make it ahead of time, or even if you make your pie a day or two in advance, you can refresh it in the oven right before you serve it to your guests. And that means heating it up for about 20 to 30 minutes in a 350-degree oven, serving it warm with vanilla ice cream. So because this pie is so dense, even though we say it serves 6 to 8, it's really going to serve like 10 people, because no one's going to have just apple pie. People are probably going to have a little slice of pumpkin pie and maybe some pecan pie or a tart and cookies, whatever. So I feel like I wanted to say something else about crumble topping. You can do lots of fun things with crumble topping. So butter, sugar, flour, and flour are the 3 basic ingredients of crumble topping. You could add oatmeal, a little oatmeal.
Oats on a mixed berry pie. Oats are very nice in the summer.
Adds another little texture contrast. You could add nuts, like small pieces of pecans. You can roughly chop them up. Walnuts are another nut that you could add. Spices that I would add to make my apple pie a little more interesting, maybe like fresh nutmeg. You could just grate the tiniest bit of fresh nutmeg into either the apples or the crumble topping.
I also like a little orange zest. I've had it that way too, and that's
Yeah.
pretty good too. A little orange zest.
Orange zest. Yeah, if you made a blueberry pie, which is more of a summer pie, but lemon works really well with blueberry. That's an excellent combination. So you could do lemon zest. That works really nicely with the blueberry pie. So that's a variation of the apple crumb pie that we do, which is pretty basic, but delicious. And you could serve it with caramel sauce. Now, caramel sauce is one of those things that can be complicated to make. So we kind of make a version of it that we call brown sugar sauce. And all it is heavy cream and brown sugar. And it's simmered over a fire over heat until it becomes thick. So where you can pick up, put a spoon, a wooden spoon into the brown sugar sauce. And when you put your finger down, it comes clean. That's called nappe. So you see that it's thickened, like heavy cream when you boil it down, thickens pretty quickly. And that is a delicious sauce to serve with your pie. We serve it with our bread pudding. Yeah, our banana chocolate bread pudding. That is amazing. So I am going to show you how to do a double crust cram. So we have our pie flat, and again we're pressing it in so that there's no air all the way around. Press the top down a little bit around the edges. then just trim off till you're about, what did we say, a quarter of an
Like a
inch
quarter of an inch away.
from the edge of the top. A lot of people like the crust. Like there's a lot of crust on that double crust apple pie, but a lot of people like to dip it into ice cream. And by people,
You mean you?
I mean me. Okay. So you do want to save this, and I'll show you what we're going to do with this in a little bit. You save your little scrap of pie dough. So we're going to do the same thing. These apples have already been treated with the flour, sugar, and cinnamon. We're going to pile them into the center. And again, it's like 5 or 6 apples per pie. The more apples you put, the taller your pie is going to be. The taller and more impressive. So we have this. And now we're going to take another pie flat. We're going to place it on top. And I'm just going to tuck it under all the way around using the edge of the pie tin as my guide. I'm just going to go all the way around. And to be honest, I believe this actually could have used another apple because I've seen them higher.
Yes.
And one thing that is really important not to forget is to create a little vent in the top of your pie so it lets the steam come out as the pie is baking. So we're going to take a paring knife, which is also a nice decorative thing, and we're going to put 3 little slits. Okay, now we're going to crimp again, just like we did before. 2 fingers on one hand and 1 finger on the other. Going all the way around. Down. There you go. So 2 fingers, hold the one down, and the other one goes in to make that little indentation, that little fluted edge. And again, you can make it fancier by pinching the rounded edges. I like it both ways. I mean, it looks really pretty either way. So it's just a matter of preference of how much time you want to spend and how much you want to impress your guests.
Beautiful.
And you can kind of
Straighten it out.
round it out. Here we go. So 2 things about the finishing of this pie. One is that we have an egg wash here, which is egg yolks. And what the egg yolks do is that they make it nice and golden brown. If you use whole eggs, that works too, but it's not going to be quite as pretty. The egg yolks are going to be really nice and shiny when it comes out of the oven. So I'm just going to brush it lightly, and you just want to be careful not to have any globs of egg yolk.
Don't want any cooked eggs.
No, that won't be so good. And so just, gently with your pastry brush, get in the corners, be really gentle so you don't damage your beautiful little crimp there. And then the sugar that we're going to put on top of this is a coarse sugar. It's completely different than regular sugar. It's really going to make the top of this crust like crunchy and extra delicious. So we got the little brush around the edge. And it's all nice and brushed. So we're going to take this coarse sugar, sprinkle that on top. And you can be, pretty generous with that. Okay. So what we're going to do with this extra dough is you're going to roll it out, and we're going to take a cutter, whatever you want. This is just a pretty leaf cutter, and we're going to make a little decoration. So I'm just going to use my little handy pie flat here. Pretend this is the scraps and that we rolled it out nice and thin. And we're just going to cut a nice garnish for this pie. I'm going to brush it very, very lightly with the egg wash. And we're going to set it, right on top. We don't want to cover our vents, and make sure our vents are not covered, and we just enough to let that air out as it's baking. Oh, look how pretty. Extreme close up. And then this is your finished product. Now, this pie was in the oven for about an hour. And I would say that the apple pie is just slightly harder to tell when it's done because it doesn't have the juices popping out of the sides the way the apple crumb does. But you will see
Some goo, like some apple goo that's seeped out.
And it'll be nice and brown all over. And I want you to see what the inside of this looks like. So we're going to cut this. And then of course we're going to have to eat it. So I think, I don't think I have that little offset. Yeah. So first, oh, so sad.
That's my favorite part.
Do you hear that crispy? Yeah, that is beautiful. I'm gonna get a spatula. Oh, we lost all the apples.
Gotta get down in there.
Yes. Okay. And I just want you to see how the apples are still in big chunks, which I think is the way it should be. It shouldn't be like applesauce. See those nice big chunks of apples. Vanilla is also another lovely addition if you wanted to mix some vanilla extract or some vanilla bean into your apples. Oh,
Maybe
that.
what kind of sugar exactly is on the top? Somebody wants to know.
It's called coarse.
It's the coarse sugar. So it's a thicker grain of sugar.
And when you roll out the crust, how thick is it? And then how thick is it when you get it rolled out? Would you say?
Oh,
It's pretty thin.
pretty thin. Not paper thin, not as, or maybe about as thin as if you were doing a pizza.
Yeah, about as thin as if you were doing a pizza. You should just barely be able to see the outline of your hand through the dough.
Someone commented that it looks very thick right there, but it's because it's folded over, right?
Yes.
Great.
And I think the crimp on this one didn't have that extra little bit,
It didn't. It was just a
a single.
cream.
And why don't we cut into the crumb pie to see what that looks like? I think best thing to use is a serrated knife to make the initial cuts, and then to really get down in there with a spatula. Ah.
Somebody asked, is the layer you use for the top thinner than the layer on the bottom, or are they all the same?
It's the same thickness.
Someone wants to know if they can come down now for samples.
Go to Heather's house.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to know, have you ever heard of the technique about putting lemon juice in the apples to keep them from browning? And do you ever do that? Do you recommend it for this or any other recipe?
I'm not a big fan of that. I don't think it's necessary, because if you're putting the cinnamon, if you're mixing cinnamon in with the apples, the cinnamon is brown, so it's not really necessary. Like if you look at these apples, they don't look brown. They just look like they have cinnamon on them. But chances are we cut these apples yesterday,
Yes.
so it's really not necessary. If you like the flavor of lemon with apples, then go for it. It will keep them from turning brown, just like with avocado and guacamole and things like that. Lemon keeps avocado from turning brown. But I personally don't like lemon with apple, so I wouldn't do it. But if you want to do it, you can.
Someone had a question. Do you have any experience with gluten-free flours?
Tried one once. We used King Arthur. So King Arthur flour is one of the best known flours in the country. Really high quality. They're in Vermont. It's an amazing place. I visited their facility. They do have a number of gluten-free flours. Have you used them?
So I have not used them, but I use a lot of nut flours in my own roasted baking, so I have experience with those. And I think that you can definitely do a pie. I have not done a pie, but I've done little tarts with almond flour, and they've come out very well.
We use almond flour to make our almond macaroons, and also for the tarts that we make at the bakery every day, our blueberry almond tart. It's kind of a cakey batter that's made with almond flour, and it's not a gluten-free tart. It just happens to be that recipe. But if you want to stay away from nuts, or you're worried that there might be a nut allergy, I'd probably maybe play around with the gluten-free King Arthur.
Or Bob's Red Mill. They also make a very nice gluten-free flour.
And they're local, right?
They are.
in Pennsylvania.
They are local.
Okay, another guest asked, this is their question. My mother-in-law used to put pats of butter over the apples before topping with the crust. Any thoughts on that?
Yep. More butter? Yes.
It's a flavor thing.
Yeah. It can't hurt.
Right.
But you just have to be careful, because you don't want it to like melt into the crust and be uneven. I think, as you can see, like there are some pie dough can be really tricky, because there are many recipes that call for like not completely mixing the butter or the shortening into the flour, so that there are little bits of butter. We don't do it that way. We mix it just until it's mixed. So we put all of our butter in there and mix it just until it's mixed, so there's no inconsistencies in the dough.
Plus, it's a little bit different since we use all butter in our pie dough. You don't need the additional butter, I would say.
And someone, you did address this earlier, but someone noticed that you didn't butter the pan before adding the crust, and is that because of the high butter content?
Yes.
And then the crust recipe, I know you can get quantities because you make such large batches, but what are the ingredients in yours again? Butter.
Butter, salt, flour, and then cold water just enough to, the water has to be very cold. Like we used to joke, we would take it out of the water cooler and because it was ice cold, and we used to joke that it was spring water. High crust meat with spring water. But that's like a really good option, or just to cool the water down with ice cubes, because if the water's warm, it'll melt the butter, and you don't want that to happen. So it's 4 ingredients, including the water. It's flour, salt, butter or butter and shortening, and the cold water.
The gluten-free flour. Can you repeat the 2 brands again? They didn't quite hear that.
There's King Arthur, and then there's Bob's Red Mill.
Okay, great. Do you mix the pastry dough by hand?
We don't. Probably do it in a mixer if you have a mixer.
It's a little bit easier. You need a lot of like upper body arm strength if you're gonna mix it by hand.
And you did add, someone didn't hear you mention salt in the pie crust, but you do have salt in the pie. Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Oh, all-purpose flour or pastry flour?
All purpose.
And why is that?
It's what we use at the bakery for almost everything.
Right.
And what is pastry flour? Does it have cornstarch in it?
It has cornstarch, so it's a different consistency.
It's not something we use. Let's see. Can you advise how long to mix the crust so that it doesn't get tough?
Just once you add, put your flour, your chunks of butter, which should be pretty evenly cubed, and your salt. Put it in the mixer. Just mix it up very quickly so everything's incorporated, and turn your mixer back on, add your cold water, and then just mix it just until everything's incorporated and smooth. As soon as everything is smooth, you're done. Let the dough rest before trying to roll it out. That's really important. Just kind of cover it, pop it in the fridge for an hour or 2, and then you can roll it. I would let it sit out for just a hair before I tried to roll it too. It's really hard to roll cold dough, but you also don't want it to be too warm because then it'll end up all over the place. And don't worry about too much flour on the table. Just roll it out. If you need to add more flour to the table so that it doesn't stick, and to the rolling pin so that it doesn't stick, go for it, because you can always brush it off later.
Someone had a question about the exact type of peeler you had and where they can purchase it.
So just
Give a brand name or.
That's a good question. I think we get them down in Chinatown or something.
we did. It's a pretty standard peeler. If you go, it's very cheap. It's a standard peeler. If you go to any supermarket, they'll usually have them.
It says made in Switzerland.
Right. So yeah, like I was up in Fresh Market, and they have them in Fresh Market. They have them at most markets.
Someone said it's called a Y peeler.
Okay.
Okay.
It's shaped like a Y.
Oh, another question. There was no liquid in the filling. Does the high butter content from the pastry add liquid to the filling, or are the apples moist enough?
I think the apples are moist enough. The funny thing is, if you look closely at these 2 pies, for some reason this one has, a fair amount of liquid.
Extra butter and then crumble for this
Yeah.
one.
That's right. That crumble topping has a lot of butter in it. Less so in the double crust.
Oh, what kind of apples did you use? Somebody missed that.
Oh, we use Granny Smith apples.
Someone ever asked, do you ever have issues with soggy bottom crust?
If you don't bake it long enough, definitely at the right temperature, bake it long enough at the right temperature. I think the key is making sure that you roll it out thin enough. It's pretty thin. And for pumpkin pies, probably blind baking them is a good idea.
Yes.
And we do it in a funny way here. We don't do the whole thing with the beans that people do to weigh it down. We just pretend this has a crimped pie shell in it. We just lay pie shells directly on top, put it in the oven for about 10 minutes. When we pull it out, the whole thing is risen quite a bit, and we just take the top and press it into the bottom. Then you can take off the top and give it another 5 minutes in the oven so that it can get brown on the bottom.
Oh, they would like to see your rolling pin that you use to roll out the dough.
It can double as a murder weapon. It's quite large and heavy. You don't need anything that big at home.
Someone said they hope you make extra pies because they'll all be coming to get pies this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Do you roll with cling film or dust with flour?
Flour.
Okay. Alrighty. Let's give a round of Heather and I give a round of applause. If there is any further questions that you think of later, please feel free to email me at Therese@chesahill.org and I will get your question. We had somebody wants to know how many calories.
Too many to count.
Yes. Many people are saying, great, thank you, thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Thanks for
I
coming.
do want to say thank you very much to everybody at the Night Kitchen. We thank you for being able to stay open during the pandemic and being there for us all. I think everybody really appreciated being able to visit and get baked goods, and and there's nothing like dessert for comfort food. So we, on behalf of the community, thank you for being there for us. Thanks for everybody for coming. This was very interesting. Makes me want to think about asking somebody else in my house to make some pie, but I think it's a great way to start out the fall. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll say goodnight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
That was fun.